Welcome in, everybody, to another episode of The Brett Allen Show. Thanks for watching and listening. Today, we have a very special guest. I'm very excited. If you have turned on your television at all once in the last 10 years or so, you have, if not, you need to, because you will recognize our guests from so many amazing projects. And I'm just excited. Once upon a time, I think is a huge part of your career, but you've done so many other things. Raphael Sbarge, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, no, it's great to be here, Brett. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I know you're currently working on another project, and I want to start there. I don't know how much of it you can talk about or how much is available to discuss, but I mean, you really, I think, are the example of like a hard working actor. I mean, you just get your hands dirty in all the things.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, what happened for me is I think about 10 years ago, I just migrated into directing and producing, and it wasn't one of those things like I had secretly wished to do this my whole life. I was producing a project with Ed Bigley Jr. and the director was unavailable, and I had to sort of step in. And what happened was that I sort of found that storytelling and finding ways to kind of communicate through this new medium, which is obviously a visual medium and has lots of people that you get to work with, and the collaboration of that, and then bringing in sort of experts, that is the camera expert and the lighting expert and the sound expert and the composer, and then working with them was very exciting. And just because I'm always so humbled by people's sort of extraordinary artistic pursuit in a very specialized area that then has such an impact on the whole story, and getting to work with them is a privilege. So anyway, that kind of then opened up doors of kind of again just finding ways, learning. There's so much to learn, and it's easy to become a film geek, as it were, because there's just always more to sort of discover. But yes, what I've what I've done is I'm working on two projects sort of simultaneously. One is finished, and it's called Only in Theaters, and it is a full-length documentary that has been doing the festival circuit, and we're close to announcing it opening. I can't quite do that yet. I guess I've teased that by saying that. And forgive me, I've got a cough. I ate a rice cake a second ago, and it's a little bit caught in my throat.
That's okay.
But Only in Theaters is a documentary about a remarkable family, a Hollywood family who run a art house cinema in Los Angeles with ties back to the origins of Hollywood. And it's called the Laemmle Theaters, and they are arguably one of the most sort of renowned art houses in the country, other than maybe Angelica in New York. And they have run this family business for close to 100 years. And we got to sort of follow them, not just over the most 24 tumultuous months of their 185-year history, but also to sort of speak about kind of going to the movies and how wonderful it is to go to the movies. And this is a family who has dedicated their lives and their personal mission to supporting filmmakers and the art of film, and the impact of what they've done. I mean, they brought foreign film to Los Angeles. They have really championed just sort of a who's who of filmmakers over those years, and really helped create their careers. We, pardon me. Hold on a second.
Drink some water. You're totally fine. I know how it is. It actually. Have you seen that? Did you ever watch The Office? Where Steve Carell eats the tiramisu cake out of the trash can. It's totally fine. We're very relaxed over here, so you're in good company.
Thank you. We got to speak to a lot of wonderful filmmakers, including Cameron Crowe, Ava DuVernay,
Wow.
James Ivory, Bruce Joel Rubin, wrote the screenplay to Ghost, won the Oscar for that. David, there's just a sort of a Allison Anders, Nicole Holofcener, a lot of really wonderful, wonderful filmmakers who then, of course, also spoke about the Laemmle theaters and how it had impacted their lives and their lives as filmmakers. So that we're going to be, as of this moment, we've just announced that we're going to be at the Newport Beach Film Festival in October. We're going to be at the New Hampshire Film Festival also in October, and then another festival in LA called the Awareness Festival, and then getting to the end of the year, there'll be a lot more news, I guess, to report. There's a Facebook page called Only in Theaters, and I should be able to, if you're interested in following that, you can kind of go there. The other project that I'm finishing now is a project called 10 Days in Watts.
Yes.
And it's a 4-part docuseries that will be on PBS in I guess January 27th, but it's basically Black History Month. It's for the 4 weeks of Black History Month. And it it really is about it's in a way, it's another family. It's a family. It's 3 generations of a family who've dedicated their lives to really elevating and improving the lives of the citizens of Watts and the surrounding communities. It's an organization called the WLCAC, and they are they've opened a garden, a farm, literally right in the middle of the most densely populated area of Watts. Yeah. And right at the foot of one of the most notorious housing projects called Nickerson Gardens, and it is a collection of stories and lives. It is a sort of a patchwork mosaic of resilience. It's a remarkable people who have really taken their hardships and really sort of converted them into really helping others and being a lighthouse for others. We shot it in April, and we're sort of in a mad rush to get it. It's the first time I've shot something with a hard air date of less than a year. So I'm really excited about it. KCT has just been a wonderful creative partner, and they have turn out just incredible content. They get nominated for 20 Emmys every year, and so they are a sort of a really gold standard of really premium content, particularly ones that also then focus on both Southern California, but then in this case also, their content then travels, to the larger PBS kind of universe into other cities around the country. So I love working with them, and I'm very excited about it. And will be a lot more announcements about that in the coming months.
Yeah, I've been hearing and seeing about both of those projects, and that was part of what sparked me to reach out, because I think a lot of people are clearly familiar with your work, but I also find the other side that you mentioned, the term storytelling, which I really like, because I think that's how I see actors. I know some, they're like, well, I'm an actor and storytelling is a bit of an odd term for me to hear, but sure, I'll grant you that. But I really do think that storytelling is really what it comes down to, because not only are you just portraying all these different characters or different people on television or in the movies, but you're also telling stories like these 2 projects that you just mentioned, which I think just lends to the fact that, you had such longevity in your career, because you can sit around and wait for things to come and audition, but also you can go out and create content too. And I think there's a case to be made for that, right? If maybe somebody might not have the resources per se, but everybody has an iPhone, right? I think, or some sort of device. And if you really want to create stories, you really can, right? And then I don't know, I counted like 22 streaming platforms the other day. I was talking to somebody. Wow. It's crazy. Which leads me to my next question for you. Because you're creating these projects, and obviously, you have made connections to distribute them at this point, but what kind of case can be made, for the fact that there are so many streaming platforms right now, and there are so many ways to get your content out. Um, Looking back at your career from when you got started, let's say you got started now, things are obviously much different than when you began. But how do what advice would you give to somebody who might be struggling, who wants to create something but doesn't necessarily know or feel like they have the ability or the resources to kind of do it? Because if that question makes any sense, it's kind of a broad one, but I would love to hear what you have to say about that.
Right. Well, I mean, look, there are, as you say, just tremendous outlets for projects to be found, discovered. I mean, Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, being, another form of a platform, right? And there are stories of shorts that get turned into longs, that started as sort of elements of an idea that were launched on those platforms that then became something much bigger. I as relates to kind of like, I have an idea and I want to make a film, or I want to make a project, or I want to create something and be able to put it out. I think my humble opinion is that the most important thing that you need to create a project, the one single thing that you need to actually do something, it is passion. It's a passion for your story, and that it somehow. I mean, I've never been someone who's sort of gone at things with trying to make career decisions that are based on, or now as a director, doing the right thing, or trying to game the system. Like, if I do this, then I'll get that. If I,
Okay.
what I've tried to do, and maybe that's to a fault. I mean, maybe I'd have some other opportunities if I hadn't. But I am absolutely focused on. Does the story move me? Does it actually light me up? Does it get me going and want to kind of like feel passion? And once I feel that passion, what I've discovered is that I can communicate it. And in communicating it, then I can get people engaged, wonderful, other filmmakers, or in this case, funders or networks, where you can say, God, this is this incredible story. And look at all the connections, and look at how amazing it is that this happened or that happened. And from that passion, essentially, that's the tide that raises all boats. There are ridiculously inexpensive, remarkable, even broadcast quality cameras that are available for so little money. And how do you use it? Well, again, if you have the passion for the story, then you'll sit down and spend the hours trying to figure it out, or how this camera works, or how you basically get the most of it. And you'll find the user groups, or the Reddit groups, or the whatever
YouTube.
it is. YouTube is the unbelievable resource, of course, and you can do astonishing things with the simplest of tools. And there's so much. I mean, no matter how passionate you are, there's always also just more and more and more. I mean, there's I get very inspired listening to other filmmakers talk about, what inspired them. So, kind of the, listening to the masterclass series, hearing Ron Howard talk about what inspired him, or hearing, any number of filmmakers. There's so much available to us in terms of kind of being able to kind of connect the dots and give you, that is, you, anyone. No, you don't have to be in Hollywood. You know what I mean? Like, you can literally be as far away from Hollywood as you can imagine, and be able to sort of take your idea and take your passion and create something from that passion. That translates to you being able to then speak about it, on social media, or essentially on one of these platforms, and that. That's something I've discovered. I didn't really even realize that. I mean, there's so much that I don't know about filmmaking, and there's so much that I'm so curious about. I had someone say to me once that they were you know, this was an acting teacher who talked to me about being a student of the art. And he said, and I don't say that from the point of view of trying to be sort of falsely humble, because this guy was an incredible teacher.
Oh no, I don't believe that for a second.
But if you have sort of a student brain, as it were, then what happens is that you just remain sort of insatiably curious about tell me what else, how does that work, and looking at all the interesting facets of the problems of storytelling and how you do it and how these things get translated into a visual medium. I mean, I find that endlessly exciting.
I get that sense and that vibe from you because, I mean, for you who's had a very successful career, you could simply just rely upon that. If you, maybe, I don't know, I'm just assuming a lot, but the fact that you sort of have expanded your interest, it's even doing a podcast really, or a video cast. I mean, I didn't know anything 4 years ago. I mean, there was no information out there. Now, I mean, there's tons of classes you can take, and there's hundreds of groups, but really you just kind of, if you have the passion, you have to figure it out. And I think that's the headline here in our conversation is, and you did that too with acting. I know if I understand correctly, is to sort of segue here, you had parents that were sort of in the industry. And then was it natural for you to pursue acting at that point because you kind of were semi-exposed to it, or where was that moment for you where you decided that you wanted to pursue this as a vocation and as a career?
Right. So I was on Sesame Street when I was 4, and I was living on the east side, and I basically, they were looking for new kids, and I somehow there was some connection made, and I went in. I ended up doing several. I have vivid memories of Big Bird and Oscar,
wow.
and Jim sat us on the Mr. Hooper put me on a donkey and talked to me about the difference between horses and donkeys. And anyway, my mother told me years later that they had offered me a contract, and she had said no. And she was a working, costume designer in New York City, and kind of in the crescendo of her career. And she said, she didn't want to be a stage mother. She didn't want to sit there while I was, in the studio waiting for me to work. And she also said, it's such a tough business. If you're gonna do this, you have to want to do it on your own. I don't want to be the one kind of just sort of kind of dragging you from place to place, which was a profound thing, because it really speaks of someone who really understands deeply, the level of kind of, the amount of rejection and or, no that you walk into, as it were. But in most cases, everyone starts at no.
Yeah.
In this business. And then maybe you get a yes. What is involved to try and actually get to a place where you can be, feel like you can find your self-worth, even based upon how much rejection one gets. And it's why, so many actors resort, I think, this is my personal opinion, to so many substances and kind of to try and deal with the complexity of the experience, right? As a way to sort of stave off the pain, as it were, because it's challenging. It's really challenging. My son years ago, I had dropped him off at preschool, and apparently his teacher said, "Django, son's name is Django. Your dad looks familiar. What does he do?" and he said, "He auditions."
I love it.
Which of course is what he saw me doing, because I'm constantly, no matter what I'm doing, even if I'm working on something, I'm looking for more work. So anyway, when I was about 12, turning 13, at this point, I'd done a bunch of plays at the Yale Rep. My mother was a professor at Yale, and I'd done some shows up there, and I'd done some other things. And we were moving back from Connecticut to New York, and I decided I wanted to be an actor. And so at that point, it was my decision. I wanted to do it as a very precocious kid. I called a friend of my mother's who was in a wonderful show called The Rebel Bridegroom, and I said, what do I do? And she said, well, here's my agent's phone number. Give him a call. So I called him, and I set up a time, and I biked over to the east side and blocked up my bike and went upstairs and walked in. And they sat down with me and they said, well, who was your representation before? And I said, representation? What's that? I don't know what that is. And they said, well, do you sing? And I said, yeah, I sing. And I'd been in a boys choir, and I traveled to Canterbury Cathedral. I was a boy treble, and I and I broke into the boy treble part of Handel's Messiah in their office. And they hadn't any child clients, but they decided to take me on, and I got one of the first things they sent me out on, which was a Jello commercial, I think, and I got my SAG card, and so I was sort of off to the races at that point, and then I just began studying, just going to lots and lots and lots of classes. New York is wonderful in that regard, where you have just sort of master teachers sort of available to you, train right away. So that's kind of where I started, and I've been doing it sort of as my it's been my career for these many decades now, and I'm so grateful. I mean, I know I'm so fortunate, and I don't even necessarily know how to communicate how one does that. There's no kind of, but again, one has to have that kind of, you have to be lit up inside yourself and be able to kind of drive the train, I guess, in a way, because you will, no matter how successful you are, you will be dealing with lots of no's, and how you then navigate that, how you then are able to continue to sort of keep it moving forward, how you're able to kind of create a sense of kind of momentum, despite the fact that there's seemingly at times just nowhere to turn. That becomes then the test of character, I think, and then that's what sustains you.
Yeah, I love the innocence of children. I have an 8-year-old, and he's very similar. He kind of doesn't really know what I do, but he's like, my dad talks to famous people, and that's what he tells and people that he sees on TV. And he would know you probably from Once Upon a Time. We just watched the new Pinocchio last night, so it's rather ironic that we're talking about this. A couple last questions here. I know you have a busy day ahead of you, but you've played, because you are just, I would say, a very vocational actor. You've had lots of different characters that you played. When speaking of your child, and the teacher's saying he looks familiar, is there a particular role that people, when you're out in public, or if you're doing, like, I don't know if you still do conventions or whatever, but the people kind of like pinpoint you to? Is it, is there something that, or does it depend on the age group or demographic who might run into you? Do they shout lines at you? I've heard that happen for other people too.
Yeah, sometimes that happens. I mean, I was out at dinner last night, and the waiter said, how do I know you? You've been in everything. And then I mentioned some of the things, obviously Once Upon a Time was a huge, successful network series that, had went on for 7 years, and then, which I was involved in 6 of them. It's sort of a phenom that almost doesn't even happen right now, to have a network show be that big, and it had such a kind of a international following, and then it got put on Disney.
Yeah.
Sorry?
It was almost a cult following. It was so huge, what you guys were doing.
Right. It was an incredible sort of lightning in a bottle thing, and then of course it translated to Disney Plus, and so the whole next generation of people found it. Once upon a time, Mass Effect, which is a video game that I did 1, 2, and 3 of, and I have I play a character, Cade Nolenko, that is a romanceable character, and I think was one of the first characters where they allowed, it's not the right word, where they finally uh, realized how important it was to be able to sort of embrace their entire audience, and so they um, they they gave a male relationship ability, which was a big thing and a wonderful thing. It was also a game that brought more women into gaming, I think, than any other game up until that point, because again, these relationships and the wonderful writing. So these are two franchises that are kind of big and kind of commercial, and as it were, and they just re-released Mass Effect as a Legendary Edition just over this past year due to BioWare, who's a company, I think, being prescient about the pandemic and realizing that everyone was going to be stuck at home and they needed to re-release it in 4K. But those two franchises are, I mean, look, I go into everything that I do with everything that I have. There's not a lack of, I love what I do. I feel so grateful and so privileged every day that I get to do it. And I am, there's not one thing that I've ever phoned in. But when lightning strikes, which happens, it's just, who knows when it's going to happen. But when lightning strikes, it's sort of it's something becomes bigger than you ever imagined. And that's bigger than any one of us. In both cases, I feel like I'm a small part of what the overall was, but I was a part of it. And I am, it's a remarkable experience to be sort of at the center of that.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I say this as we wrap here, and I say this to everybody that I talk to, your job is so remarkably different than what anybody else can do or whatever experience as an actor. You know what I mean? Because it's so, I mean, even at the highest level, I've heard, and I say that term just like, whoever, it's, you just don't know. You can't rest on your laurels. You know what I'm saying? Even during the last 2 years when the world shut down, you had some of these like massive people going, this is crazy, like, I don't know if I'm ever going to work again. You know what I mean? But thank goodness we came out of everything for the most part here, and we're getting back. People are putting content out. I'm excited for these upcoming projects. And as a side note, if I saw you out in public, I mean, there's multiple things I would know you from. I was watching your demo reel before we talked. I do think you playing Bigfoot in an episode of Castle is pretty funny. Of course, The Good Doctor, New Amsterdam. I mean, a lot of things as of late, but even just going all the way back to Bates and to Criminal Mind, or Murder in the First. I mean, just some very iconic roles, and I'm excited to see what's next. And we're getting ready to introduce my 8-year-old to Once Upon a Time now, because it just showed up on Disney, and he's become kind of curious about it. So I haven't watched it in years, so I'm excited to relive that series, because it was very groundbreaking, though nothing had ever come about like it. And you're taking these iconic stories, fairy tales, and you're blending them into real life, which was very cool. And of
That was
course,
the thing about that show, which was which I got people said so often, which was that they got to watch it with their kids, and that generationally the people gathered around it, kind of like the classic gathering around the fire to hear the story. Grandma who knew these characters because she watched the original Disney movies, and then mom and dad, and it was men and women who loved the show because it had something for both. And of course, then the younger kids, it seemed to kind of play to a very wide audience, which again, in a fractionalized kind of viewing audiences that we have, it was sort of unique. So it's great that you and your son get to sit down together.
Yeah, and of course, why would Jiminy not be a psychologist or a psychiatrist? I mean, it would make perfect sense. Well, I appreciate your time. I know you have a lot happening these days, and I thank you for your time and your graciousness for chatting with us today.
Thank you so much for reaching out. It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.